She's the oldest semi-finalist for 31 years. I'll be back with more sport in about half an hour.
Ollie, thanks very much indeed. Well, does the Labour Party have an anti-Semitism problem? Some inside the party think it does. The MP for Bradford, Naz Shah, was suspended from Labour yesterday for comments she made on social media about Israel before she became an MP. Well, Tom Bateman is our political correspondent. Tom, you get the sense that this story is very far from over. She's been suspended, but what now? Is there pressure for her to be expelled from the party?
Well, Norman, I mean, you say the story is far from over. In a way, that's the point, because we knew about this, 48 hours ago, when it was first being reported that Naz Shah had shared these Facebook posts, and in particular that post with a picture of the United States and Israel superimposed on top of it, talking about a solution to the Israel-Palestine problem. And that was what many people said was so deeply offensive. And the issue is, it's taken 2 days, really, for any concerted action about this. And Jeremy Corbyn's critics are saying, well, first of all, yesterday, that he said she's apologised, it happened before she was an MP. And yet it took many hours into the afternoon yesterday before she had the whip suspended, before she was suspended effectively from the Labour Party in her role as an MP at least. And now what you have is a situation where this has really become about a test of Jeremy Corbyn's leadership. Does he have a grip on this issue that many people are now saying of anti-Semitism in the party? And last night we had two peers, one Labour peer, Lord Levy, a former fundraiser under Tony Blair, saying that the party has a problem with anti-Semitism, and crucially for Jeremy Corbyn, that it had taken the leadership too long to do anything about it. So I think now you've got two things going on: the questions over Naz Shah herself and whether or not she will be expelled, and what the party says about that. The leadership is there is now an investigation into that. But I think more fundamentally, those questions about Mr. Corbyn's leadership and whether or not he did enough quickly enough to tackle this. And certainly people like Lord Levy and others now saying he should have acted more quickly.
Tom, thanks very much indeed. Well, joining me now from Westminster is the Labour MP John Mann, who's also chair of the all-party group against anti-Semitism, and in the studio, Richard Angel, director of the Labour think tank Progress, and Rabbi Laura Janner-Klausner, senior rabbi to Reform Judaism. John, let me start with you. I think I heard you yesterday saying that Naz Shah should go to Israel. I mean, is she being scapegoated for stupid remarks?
Well, they're stupid remarks, but they're also racist remarks and highly offensive. And therefore either she's thrown out or she's educated about anti-Semitism and the offence, the grave events she's created.
John, let me just stop there. You think she should be thrown out, she should be expelled?
They are the two. Well, that's John McDonnell's line on this. They're the two options. What I've recommended, and I did so before she was suspended to Jeremy Corbyn and to her directly personally, is that she should be educated in anti-Semitism in order that she can be one of the people who fights it. And that should include, and I've asked Jeremy Corbyn to do this, that she should go to Israel, to the Holocaust Centre at Yad Vashem, and also to Sderot, where the missiles from Hamas hit families, to get a better understanding of Israel and why her remarks are so offensive.
Can I just ask you this very blunt question? Do you believe she's an anti-Semite?
Her remarks are anti-Semitic. And we could do two things with, whether it's her or anybody else in the Labour Party or elsewhere. We can either kind of castigate them, ignore them, or we can educate them. Prejudice comes from ignorance. And the best counter to prejudice is education. And that's what she seems willing and happy to engage.
Okay.
That's a good sign.
Let me bring in Rabbi Laura. I mean, I think you know Naz Shah a bit.
Yes.
Do you believe she is an anti-Semite?
No, I don't. I agree with John that the posts were anti-Semitic. They swapped Israel and Jew. They were awful. They were terrible. I'm certain that she is up for change and learning. And from the point of view of a modelling change in Britain, that is excellent to say, I was wrong, I am sorry, I offended many people, and she detailed what was wrong. If only we could all do that in our lives, because we know that racism and anti-Semitism, homophobia, they're all out there. And when somebody saying something or doing something wrong, if they have the courage and the integrity to say, I really was wrong and I'm up for learning. And I agree with John, I would love to take Naz to Israel and to the territories, not just to the Holocaust Museum, just down in the street to hang out in a cafe, because that's how you learn about normality.
Richard, I suppose the backdrop to this is the Labour Party more broadly, because this is not the first time we've had a row about anti-Semitism. We've got investigations going into various Labour university clubs. I mean, do you think Jeremy Corbyn's Labour Party has a problem with anti-Semitism?
Undoubtedly, it has a problem with anti-Semitism, and the inaction when these things come about and how quickly they're dealt with is troubling for people. And people fear that when people like Ken Livingstone say they've never heard or seen anti-Semitism in the Labour Party, they wonder how on earth he can, what meetings or what part of the party he is part of.
But is it in action? Is it
yeah.
in action? I mean, to be fair to Mr Corbyn, he's set up an inquiry into racism and anti-Semitism in various Labour clubs. He was pretty much straight out of the blocks in condemning what Naz Shah had said. She was removed as John McDonnell, the Shadow Chancellor's parliamentary aide, and at the end of the day, she was suspended. Now, all that happened, bing, bang, bosh, in about 24 hours.
There was a bit of space between the bing, the bang and the bosh. I mean, had the process been followed, she would have been immediately suspended, that then gone to an investigation, and my understanding is it was part of office that was holding back that formal process just being administered by the staff in the normal way. So there is often a hesitation before these things happen. I'm afraid, I fear there are too many political judgments that seem to be made rather than build confidence in our party. Some people say wrong things. Sometimes we attract as a party, and all parties do, people who misbehave. But the point is when these situations happen, you have to act to agreed rules. Now, our agreed rules aren't good enough at the moment, but they aren't even followed when something like this comes up.
John, let me put this to you, that much of the row here is actually, in a funny sort of way, a surrogate for a row about Jeremy Corbyn, because he is very clearly identified as pro-Palestinian and his supporters similarly. And therefore, it's all sort of wrapped up in the tension around Mr Corbyn's leadership.
Well, I've been doing this work for years, and I've been on the BBC for years talking about it as well. And so this isn't a new problem. This is an old problem that's resurrected in quite a big way. I think social media is one factor, but I think what leadership has to be is to say the right things, but also then to act. And critically, there needs to be an effective education programme across the Labour Party about anti-Semitism, what it is, so that people understand what is offensive and why it's offensive. You know, yesterday I was getting emails that said, oh, you can't be racist against Jews because they're rich. That's coming from people on the left. Some quite extraordinary stuff. The levels of prejudice and ignorance are very high.
Okay, Rabbi Laura, let me just, from the perspective of the Jewish community, I mean, how damaging is this to Labour?
To Labour, I think it is damaging, and people are frightened, which is why I think that the action of both repentance and also the suspension are good. I don't think it's just about the Labour Party. We need to look across the board at all parties, and not even just the political institutions. The language that is slipping in the general public around Jews, around Muslims, needs to be called out. So I am concerned that it's very easy to deflect it on the Labour Party, rather than to say, what does it mean for Britain that we are further away from World War II and that the language between Israel and Jews gets muddled up? And what we saw 2 years ago at Protective Edge, the war between Hamas and Israel, the language that exploded on social media, that's not to do with the Labour Party. And that's why I think that Naz thing is really interesting, because what she did is utterly wrong, and now she's saying, I'm sorry. That's a very good model.
Richard, let me just ask you one other one on the Labour Party, which is, you talked about how Labour had taken their time to deal with this. Is part of it, again, because of the Palestinian-Israel political argument? And bluntly, Naz Shah is seen as on the same side as Jeremy Corbyn, and therefore maybe there was a reluctance to crack down on her.
I think that's true. One of the reasons why I've always liked Naz Shah is how much George Galloway hates her. So she's, I think she's on lots of things spoken in a passionate way and has experienced social injustice in a way that I've always found quite inspiring, which is why I was personally disappointed, but why her words to date have been useful in that she seeks to want to do something better, and why I think John is being helpful by saying, now let's see the action, not just the words. And I think Laura was generous about the Labour Party, but the reason why this is a problem for the Labour Party and the reason why Labour Party members like me are so appalled by this is we pride ourselves on being the anti-racist party. You know, we are the party that fights social injustice in our party, and what we can't have is people turning a blind eye. And while there are lots that criticise Israel, many of them Israelis, when criticism of Israel is anti-Semitic, it must be called out, and we shouldn't be cowardish about that because there are things that the Israeli government or state might get wrong from time to time. Because, and more importantly, British Jews should not be held responsible for a government or a country they may never have visited or been part of.
Okay.
And what I see on my timeline on Twitter and other places, and from Labour Party people, I fear, is that all Jews are responsible for various bad things that happen elsewhere, and
Richard,
that's not right.
We're going to have to leave it there. Rabbi Laura, John Mann, thanks very much indeed. Well, coming up, are you a smoker? Some doctors are